Hello, good evening, everyone. This is Walter Roban, Minister for Home Affairs and Deputy Premier. I'm happy to be with you all on my first Facebook Live to talk to you, the Bermudian public, residents, about, certainly from the standpoint of my own ministry, what's happening and generally what's happening in our community. So I'm happy to be here to talk to you about what the Ministry of Home Affairs and all its departments are doing as we, of course, emerge out of COVID, but just generally there are things that were always happening that are important to Bermuda, that are important to all of you. So thank you for having me here, and happy to share with you some of what's happening in the government, but particularly what's happening in the Ministry of Home Affairs.
Minister Roban, we have some questions, so let's start with landlord-tenant issues. The question is, during the pandemic, I was unable to work and therefore unable to pay my rent. Does my landlord have the right to evict me?
Well, your landlord does have the right to have their rent collected. And if you are paying the rent as a consequence of non-payment, they can give you notice to quit and seek the debt owed. The law does allow that.
But can the landlord change the locks and put my stuff out on the street if I'm unable to find a place by the date of my eviction?
The answer is no. Landlord cannot do these things, and a landlord needs to go to court, because there's a process with completing an eviction, which will be start with a notice to quit, and certainly seeking as well for any outstanding rents to be collected, and to seek possession order to regain possession of the rental unit from you as the renter. And the magistrates will set a date that the tenant has to comply with. And with this is a part of the process that has to be done in order for the landlord to take possession of the property. It is a legal process. It is a process that is in law. And so the landlord cannot damage or take possession or remove your property from the rental unit without going through this process.
What if I rent a room? Can I be put out without notice?
Well, one would expect that if you rent a room that you have some sort of agreement with whom you're renting it from. And if by some chance you find yourself in some challenge with paying your rent for the space, that the landlord and you will come to some agreement as to if you're unable to satisfy the outstanding amounts as to when you will leave. And typically the standard practice is that if you are renting from a week to week or month to month, you'll be given equal time as is your agreement to vacate. So even if you're renting from month to month, there is a certainly practice, and you are protected in a way that you can actually hopefully come to some agreement with the landlord, maybe in payment, or at least if you have to quit, they should give you reasonable time to quit the premises if that is what the agreement is.
And speaking about the relationship between a landlord and a tenant, what are the rights of a tenant?
Well, a tenant has a right to peaceful and private enjoyment of the rental unit that they have agreed to rent in that property, and also to have that unit or whatever space they're renting to be properly maintained by the landlord.
And on the other side, what are the rights of the landlord?
The landlord certainly has a right to have the rent paid in full or when it's properly due, and have the tenant to be respectful as well to the space that they are using and that they have rented from the landlord.
And this question comes up from time to time. Can a landlord enter my rental unit without my knowledge?
The answer is no. The landlord should give you proper notice if there is a need to enter the premises upon which you have rented and the space in which you have rented. The only time the landlord can enter that space without notice if there's some distress, flooding or fire damage or some other situation where the area is in distress and you're not available to open the premises so that entry can be had. So that's the only time that a landlord can. And if the landlord needs to enter the premises, they should give 24 hours notice for such entry.
And this is a question some may not be familiar with. I do not have a lease. Does that mean I have no rights?
You do have rights. Without a lease, you are on what the law would describe as a month-to-month tenancy, and that is outlined in the relevant act. And that becomes the basic terms and conditions under which your tenancy would be governed.
And due to the pandemic, some may find themselves in financial difficulty. So this question is relevant to that. Are there any circumstances where a tenant can refuse to pay rent?
Really, the answer is no. Only the courts can grant a stay of rent. This is usually granted when the landlord is some possibly negligent for some reason in maintaining or upkeeping the property or ensuring like I said earlier, the proper enjoyment privately of the actual tenant, and it's a clear breach of the tenancy agreement. But be advised that once the court is satisfied that the maintenance of the property or whatever has been, the challenge has been done, the rent that you are withholding would need to be provided to that landlord. So really, persons who have tenancy agreements should pay their rent. And as long as the landlord is providing the proper services under the agreed tenancy, we should pay our rent.
But during this time, as we're in phase 4 of the COVID-19 pandemic, is there an opportunity to at least have the conversation between the renter and the landlord to maybe work out some other terms if they are agreeable to both?
Yes, one of the things that the government did very early on during the period of the pandemic and state of emergency, we outlined some very clear guidelines that we felt landlords and tenants should see as a guide for them to work through the situation that maybe a tenant was confronted with. Typically, most persons who found themselves not paying rent, it was not their fault. They were out of work, the establishment upon which they were working were closed down, or they experienced a reduced in salary, or some circumstance that they had no control. We all had no control over the circumstances that the pandemic put us in. So we outline guidelines so that a landlord who we know may themselves have obligations with the banks or around their own property, around their own matters, was relying on that rent and not having the rent will put a landlord into some challenge. But we would hope that landlords during this period of time have been understanding of the situation that their tenants were in. Certainly, if that tenant has had a very good record of payment, that there could be some sort of agreement to how they might manage each other's relationship during the time, even if it meant getting a reduced amount of rent for a period of time until such time as the state of emergency would end. Thankfully, now we're in phase 4, and some of these issues we hope, have since receded for many people. But we believe that the guidelines that we gave were helpful and would help landlords and tenants to manage themselves through the pandemic.
Let's move on to the Department of Planning and something topical, the Riddles Bay Special Development Order. As you know, this is something that has just come into the public's awareness. So many people are asking, what is the purpose of the Riddles Bay Special Development Order?
Yeah, thank you for that question. The Riddles Bay Special Development Order is a mechanism for the development of the Riddles Bay property in a manner that we believe would be best done in the public interest. and that the plans that have been devised for Riddles Bay actually are good plans, which the recommendation was that a special development order be devised to ensure that this development could be done under proper legal conditions. So the special development order will, in a nutshell, and I'm happy to go into more detail if there are any further questions, there are about 92 or so acres of the Riddles Bay estate. It will ensure that 25% of that land will be made available for development, about 18 lots. Ensure that 25% of those, and then it will also ensure under the special development order conditions that the other 75% is turned into protected conservation and reserve land that will be open to the public. So due to the very mixed sort of zoning of the Riddles Bay area, the best way to achieve this process in the way that would ensure what is actually going to be achieved, one is a development that will, at this time, inject a substantial amount of capital into the country that is greatly needed in the construction industry. It will bring together substantial jobs on the development, which will be very positive for the community, for those who are looking for work. It will also do, which I think is perhaps the most important component of this order and what it's seeking to bring about, is create a substantial 64-acre nature reserve and protected conservation area. This is virtually unprecedented for Bermuda. This will become one of the largest privately owned conservation areas on the island, and one of the largest creations of a private conservation area on the island. That will be open to the public for perpetuity. So I believe, and certainly the government believes, which is why I was happy to bring the order to the legislature, where it will be fully debated and has already been the subject of considerable public scrutiny, that this will be a good development for Bermuda from the standpoint of conservation and environment and the protection of our environment, but also is a plus for a needed injection of capital, plus $75 million in capital development that's associated with this particular property. That doesn't include the commitment that the developer must ongoingly put to the maintenance of the conservation area for perpetuity. So not only will you have to build the actual units or the planned development, which will still be subject to planning scrutiny as each development is finalized, but it will also ensure in perpetuity land that is conserved for all of our residents and all people in Bermuda to enjoy. I think this is a wonderful opportunity for that.
And how much will the Riddles Bay Special Development Order cost the government?
There is no cost to the government whatsoever. This is a private development. There is no public land as a part of it, so there is no cost to it other than the process of bringing the special development order, preparing it and bringing it to the legislature for its approval.
And can you speak to the developer's intentions?
Yes, well, the developer is keen to ensure that as a priority, as I stated earlier, that this development does happen, that it will attract the types of residents and clientele who can appreciate the quality of development that is seeking to be achieved. But also the developer is committed to the environmental component of this and making sure that a substantial amount of the land out there is preserved and is actually improved. Perhaps many people don't appreciate that right now, how the Riddles Bay area is actually zoned. you could put up an amusement park out there. You could put up a racetrack out there. You could put up types of developments and structures that have no environmental or potentially commercial value whatsoever to the land because it is the way it is zoned. But with what is being proposed and the intentions of the developer, that will ensure that the majority of the land out there is actually not only kept, but is maintained and brought into a state that is more helpful to our environment. They will bring endemics and natural species there. They will replenish the land and move out invasives and other elements that are not natural to the area and restore it to some semblance of what it might have looked like prior to the development that has been there for quite some time. So the developer's intentions, certainly from an environmental standpoint, are good. And we believe this is in the public interest. Any opportunity to preserve large tracts of Bermudian land for conservation purposes has to be in the public interest, which is why this special development order is so important.
And was there an environmental assessment done in regards to this scheme?
Yes, one of the requirements now for major developments of this type is that environmental impact assessments are always done. Certainly, this has been the precedent established in recent years, and certainly will continue to be a part of any major developments going forward. Environmental impact assessments are required, and was a requirement of this process to get into this phase of that development.
And you spoke about the transparency of this project. Can the members of the public go and find out information regarding this project? Where can they go for that?
They can go onto the planning website. The planning has a system, and the planning file for this particular development is open to the public. Anyone can go and see it online, or they can certainly visit the planning department to inspect themselves the whole process of how this particular application was handled up to this point of the recommendation for the special development order.
And just moving on from planning for a moment, I know that a lot of us are very interested in bananas. So Minister, what can you tell us about bananas? Is there any update that you can provide?
Thank you for the question on bananas. I do appreciate that many residents love bananas, and bananas are a long-standing part of many people's diet from childhood right up to full adulthood. And bananas are essentially a part of our culinary tradition as Bermudians. So I appreciate the intense interest in bananas. Unfortunately, we've been in a situation, and I have spoken in the media on this in the past, where shipments of bananas coming to Bermuda have been contaminated with mealybug and scale. And this is unfortunate because that means that these bananas haven't been able to be landed and made available to the public to buy. It has resulted in essentially those who have been principally importing bananas up to this point have stopped bringing them in because of the cost associated with trying to deal with this process of trying to get those bananas in. It has become a costly process for them, and they decided in their own interest to halt it. But the role of the Ministry of Home Affairs and the Department of Environment and Natural Services is to protect Bermuda's natural environment, to protect our food supply that we import, to not allow it to be contaminated, to ensure that every resident has healthy food to consume and to sustain our island. So unfortunately, this has meant that the regular importation of bananas has been severely reduced, if not halted altogether. But in the meantime, we have been working with the importers, but also with others, to actually find a way to resume the importation of bananas from safe sources, and also find a way to, on island, if we can, to clean bananas that might enter the island that might have a bit of contamination, but use methods that are environmentally friendly and safe and healthy to potentially clean bananas that may come on island that may have some challenges. So we're working on two levels. I am happy to announce, and I did mention this in the media previously, that a local farmer, again, hats off to our farmers who have found ways to keep their supply of food that they produce on island available to our public during this pandemic. I really am grateful for their work in this area. And again, one of our farmers that stepped up to the challenge, they did find a way to source bananas and source a sample shipment that was clean and was clean enough to be made available on sale. That was a number of weeks ago. That person has, I believe, made an effort to bring in a much larger, substantial shipment that we hope as well will be clean. We are reasonably confident that because this person was successful the first time, and since they've taken a great time and effort to source the bananas and to ensure that who they're sourcing them from understood what was needed, and they've had initial success at that this next shipment, which will be a substantial shipment that they are sourcing, will be successful. So we're hoping it will be, so that there can be a constant supply of bananas, and that even some of our local stores, such as Marketplace, such as Supermart, and even the local importers of food can also work with them, because they can assist with potentially making this a very profitable venture for everybody, because they will now be relieved of the burden of sourcing and paying and carrying a lot of the liability around bringing in. And they can then just work with this importer to bring in bananas if this person can be successful with bringing in their next shipment, which I do hope myself will be successful, because I know that it will bring relief to a lot of people.
Many will say nothing beats a local banana. Can you speak to the possibility that we could have some local bananas soon grown here?
I agree with that 100%. There's nothing better than a local banana. The unfortunate thing is that due to Umberto, much of the local banana crop would have been damaged. And only if there were pockets of banana crops that were in a protected area, they might have been salvaged. But in general, that has been the chief challenge for the local banana population. And I know that local farmers are working to potentially in the next couple months see more bananas locally being made available, but that clearly won't satisfy the full demand. But it'll be good to see more local bananas back on the market that everybody can enjoy. And we in the department will be working with local farmers to assist with any way that we can to help bring about much more banana production. And if I can just say just briefly, almost anybody can grow bananas. If you have space in your yard, if you have a yard or an area, banana trees are pretty resilient and can grow almost anywhere. You may have to give it a little bit of nutrients, but once it's established, a banana tree can be self-sustaining and keep producing bananas on a regular basis if it's in the right conditions. So many of us think that they can't grow bananas. I would actually say that many of us who perhaps want bananas can grow them ourselves locally. You can have your own little patch of bananas that will supply you on a regular basis if you have that banana tree in the right conditions.
And you spoke about food security earlier a little while ago. You just mentioned it. So can you expand a little bit more on the concept of food security, what residents can do in that regard, and also in general, how Bermuda can improve its food security?
Well, food security is the effort to ensure that the supply of food of a community is sustainable and reliable and can meet the needs of the community. And in particular, ensuring that local supply is maximized to ensure the greatest level of preservation of supply as possible. This has become a priority for the government. Obviously, during the pandemic period, that became a great concern. And the Premier did ask me to spend some of my time working with shippers, dialoguing with shippers, dialoguing with the grocers, dialoguing with the wholesalers about the issues around food security and how we can ensure a preservation of our supply lines for food in the island, but also doing what we can to work with our local farmers and fishermen and other persons who are interested in agriculture to find ways to, I guess, ensure the sustainable production of food on island, to come up with a plan if it came to a more distressful situation around supply chains, on how we could produce certain things here on island to supply the local community. I am thankful and happy and relieved that we did not come to a point of crisis with supply lines. There were clearly some challenges, and I must commend the wholesalers, I must commend the shippers who had very well detailed plans on how to deal with any crises that might emerge. And our grocers who actually made sure, by and large, that there were no mass shortages of anything on our shelves for the past 4 months. And I think one can argue that our local grocery stores, all of them together, actually handled their situation much better than in other countries that we saw what was happening. There was never generally the sort of shortages that we saw appearing on shelves in North America in particular. We didn't see that here. And that's because our suppliers and our grocers and wholesalers and shippers were working together. And they kept myself and the government aware of their plans. We kept in contact on a regular basis, and I believe that helped. So our hats off to all those people who worked as part of that process. People in the Ministry of National Security, people in the Ministry of Home Affairs, people in the Department of Environment and Natural Services, and also those in the agricultural community and the wholesaler community. All of them working together. And it was an honor to work with them. And we will continue to work together because the issue of food security actually is of not only importance to Bermuda, but also to all island communities in the region.
So that's a good place to go to, Minister. So you mentioned clearly Bermuda is not the only jurisdiction looking at food security. Have you reached out to other jurisdictions to dialogue and see what they're doing around food security and how that can improve Bermuda's food security?
Yes, actually, thank you for that question. Actually, I have for much of this year. I have been talking to key people in the area of the Caribbean region about the issue of food security. As I stated earlier, this is an issue that is important to all islands in the region. Right now, the majority of islands are in the same general situation. We all import most of our food, or a substantial percentage of it. And right now, there is an effort within the Caribbean community to find a way to decrease substantially the amount of dollars that are spent on exporting to sourcing food, particularly in North America. North America is basically the food basket for the Caribbean and for the islands in our region. Most of the food is sourced from there. All products that aren't produced in the region itself, they are sourced in North America and in the United States in particular. But there is a realization amongst all the leadership, both private and public sector, that this has to change. So there's an effort to repatriate something like $500 million worth of food production over the next 5 years. And that is a plan that we support, and we have been dialoguing with the private sector and public sector partners in the region to be a part of whatever is put in place. Obviously, the COVID experience has perhaps challenged that effort and delayed it slightly, but it is a commitment that we all know now, having gone through this experience, that we must push on with and try and bring some sort of change in that relationship. I can say that myself, I am committed to, over the next couple of years, bringing a lot more of land in Bermuda into production around agriculture in different ways. And that's one thing that I have committed to pursuing and planning out on behalf of the government and on behalf of the people of Bermuda, because there is land available and we can do more on island to enhance our food security.
We've had a question sent in by one of the viewers. The question is, government duty cuts are rarely passed on to the consumer from the grocery stores. Why is that, and how can we fix it?
That's a very good question, and I thank the viewer and listener for sending it in. We have noticed that as well. And as you know, over the last couple of years, the issue of the cost of food in Bermuda has become an issue for everybody. And particularly during those coming out of the recession period from 2008 up to now, and even through the pandemic, the cost of food has been an issue. And we realize that we have to bring down those costs. I must say to the listener that actually I've had some very good conversations with the grocers about this, and they recognize that that is an issue for them. But there are a few things that have to happen. And one thing, I think there has to be more education for all of us on what really, how is food priced in Bermuda for the items that are bought in. And there are some stores that bring in up to 25,000 different brand items. How are those priced? And get an understanding of how price impacts the cost of food in Bermuda. I can say that one thing this government has done in its time that it's been the administration, we have taken the action of putting zero duty on a whole list of goods. So right now there are certain goods, most of them being vegetables and staple goods that actually are highly nutritious and are good for healthy eating. It is zero duty. So all the fruits and vegetables, most of the fruits and vegetables, I should say, that are imported are on zero duty. Now, the passing on of those savings to the consumer is an issue, and we know that. And that has not necessarily been the experience of everybody during this period of time since this has been in place. So that is why Premier Burt, a few years ago, set up a revision of the old Price Commission, and it is now termed the Cost of Living Commission. It is currently being chaired by Deputy Speaker and Member of Parliament of many years and experience, Derek Burgess, and he and his team are beginning to take a hard look at this issue. If people remember, during the pandemic, we did set up a price gouging tool so that people could report any strange movements or any behavior they saw in the cost of goods. That still is available on the government website for people to go in and submit if they see something that they don't particularly like about price of certain items. And there's a process for doing that. And I recommend you go on to www.govt.bm and see the price gouging tool that can be used by anyone to report any strange occurrences or behaviors around price. And I can assure you that MP Burgess and his team will look into it, because we are concerned about it. And they're also busy coming up with ideas on how we can create different baskets of goods that are at a lower cost so that the consumer can see some savings at the cash register.
And we'll just leave food security for now and move on to debt collection. So the Debt Collection Act 2018, can you speak to some of the key components of that act?
Yes, thank you for that question. Some of the key components of the Debt Collection Act are, it establishes Consumer Affairs as the licensing authority with a regulatory and enforcement powers around debt collection. Let me just sidetrack slightly. Prior to the Debt Collection Act of 2018, the debt collection industry was a bit of a Wild West, and I think many people were experiencing serious challenges in how they were being treated around the process of debt collection. So this act was put in place to address those issues, and that's why this act was established. The act also defines the eligibility criteria and procedure for licensing debt collectors. It identifies unfair debt collection practices. It outlines the powers of the minister and the debt collection licensing authority, and establishes the inspection and investigation powers. It establishes the debt collection tribunal to hear appeals on debt collection situations and hear any complaints from debtors against anything that they may have experienced with a debt collector. It creates offenses for breaching the provisions of the act. It provides the minister with the authority to make regulations in relation to any fee applications, penalties, or breaches. And a debt collector under this act cannot charge, and I think this is an important point for people to know, under the Debt Collection Act of 2018, a debt collector cannot charge more than once a commission fee, and that fee cannot exceed 20% of the original debt, not the debt with the interest that might have been added by a proposed collector, but the original amount, not more than 20% of the original amount. That's very important for people to understand. I know some people go through this situation where it looks like the debt that they owe has ballooned in a way. Well, now those practices are no longer permitted. And a monthly administration fee can be charged on outstanding debt up to a maximum of 2%. So I hope those points are clear to everyone. We put this act in place to bring more structure, more management, and more ethical practices when it comes to debt collection. But I must say, people must remember, this does not stop you from meeting your obligations. You still must meet your obligations so that you do not find yourself in the situation where a debt collector is who you're dealing with.
And what are the Act's benefits to consumers?
There are a number of benefits to consumers that this act has. It includes the right of notification from the debt collector in writing, and also providing the amount of the debt. So these are the things that the person who is owed money is entitled to. They're also entitled to the name to ensure that it's clear who the creditor is, that the right to dispute the debt is also available to them within 30 days of written notification. And within those 30 days, if the debt is disputed, that the debt collector will obtain further verification of the debt to give a copy to the debtor. And the debtor and the debt collector still must cease collecting of the debt or any part thereof that is in dispute until the verification of that process and of the debt is completely resolved. So if there is a dispute, everyone, and if there's a portion of, let's say you might agree that 50 or 60% of the debt is what you owe, but the 40% aspects of it you dispute, that the requirement to pay that 40% will be on hold until such time as the verification of that portion is made.
And the Debt Collection Act 2018, can you address what are the debts that are actually covered under the Act?
I would say that these are the types of debts that are covered under the Act. The Act addresses all debts of the debtor as defined by the Act. Debt is defined in clauses 2 of the Act and as being a monetary obligation enforceable by law and including purchases on credit, accounts receivable, loans of money, or the provisions of goods and services. So that is how debt is defined by the Act.
And do debt collectors have to be licensed?
Yes, debt collectors have to be licensed now. That was not the case before. And you may have found all types of interesting people saying that they collect debts for certain people. So those businesses that are classified as debt collectors and that are already engaging in debt collection businesses will have until September 30th, 2020, in which to apply for a license, which will be available for a 2-year period. And no debt collection business will be able to conduct business without a valid license after that date of September 30th. To do so will be an offense. So you have every right after September 30th to ensure that whoever may approach you, if you find yourself in a situation, to get verification of their license. If they're not licensed, you don't have to deal with them as a collector.
And what about creditors?
Thank you for that question about creditors. Creditors collect their own debts. Therefore, they do not have to have a debt collection license. And they are not, and if they are not collecting a debt on behalf of another person or a business. So if they're collecting their own debt, they don't need to be actually licensed, as long as they're collecting debt that is theirs. However, they are subject to Part 4, which deals with unfair debt collection practices. So irrespective of the role that you play in the debt collection process, if you are collecting debt for yourself or for someone else, there are certain practices which are now unlawful, and those have to be followed.
And we've had another question that has been sent in. This is about arable land. So the question is, what is arable land? Can one build on it or use it for gardening?
That's a very good question. Arable land is any land that has been zoned as, I guess, available for agricultural purposes. That could be planting, that could be the maintaining of livestock, or any such practices that would fit into agriculture. Building on it is subject to planning approval, because presumably, if you're going to build on arable land, you're building on something that complements the use of the land for arable purposes. But that will be subject to planning approval in any event. Any fixed structure that you will put on a piece of land is subject to planning approval.
And just switching gears for a moment to move on to Department of Energy this time, which also falls under the Ministry of Home Affairs. Are there any tips that you can give residents? Obviously, we're in the midst of the summer heat. How can they reduce the heat in their homes without necessarily using their air conditioner?
Well, that's a good question, because we all are, I think, right now experiencing an increase in the heat for the summer, and certainly the humidity level, which seems to amplify the heat when we have our Bermuda summers. Now that the weather is getting warm, we will want to find ways to keep comfortable, and we're all striving for that, including myself. But before you switch on that air conditioner, there are things that you can do. And some of these things are really just old-fashioned things, which our people have been doing for centuries, such as keep the shades and the curtains and the blinds drawn when the sun is hitting that particular side of the house. And if you can prevent your interiors from picking up heat in the first place, then you will probably feel more comfortable. That's really an old-fashioned trick, I would say. If you are sprucing up your home this summer and getting, perhaps giving it a bit of a coat of paint, you might want to look at lighter colors of paint, not darker colors of paint, less saturated colors that will reflect the heat rather than attracting heat. Dark colors usually with a lot of pigment in them pick up a lot of heat. So people should look at, if you're going to do that renovation or maintenance, choose a lighter color. That might help for your space to be a little bit more cooler as well.
And speaking about air conditioning, what are some of the things that
Turn on that light over there. That might actually help a little bit.
Sure.
Just a minute, everybody. We're just going to adjust a little bit of lighting. Yes, and that might be a little better.
Hopefully that's better for everyone.
Yes, I hope so.
The air conditioning, we were just speaking about air conditioners. So can you give some recommendations of what people should look for if they're buying or going to be using their air conditioners during the summer?
Yes, happy to do so. If you are using an AC, then make sure you are buying one that fits the size of the room that you have. Just don't go to the store and buy something off the shelf without making sure certain things are done, such as the size of the room which you're intending to use it in. Just a quick lesson around air conditioning. Air conditioning is cool air and lowers humidity. The second thing is, which is really what is important for people to understand, is the comfort is more important than cooling. And so you should allow your air conditioner to run for a while if you're going to be using it. If it cools the space quickly, then it can't run long enough to dehumidify. Why is this a bad thing? Is, well, because then your big AC unit will start cooling and turning off and turning on, which means that it will wear and tear faster. So it's very important that you buy or have an air conditioner and you make sure you get the proper advice, that it fits the type of space that you have fitted in for, because that will ensure a more efficient use of temperature. It will ensure an efficient use of management of humidity and the conditions in the space. And you need to, if you want to feel comfortable in a room, in a dry room, certainly you should probably put the air conditioner around 7-8 degrees. Would be a good temperature, or somewhere between 78 and 72 degrees. So it's important that you get the right size air conditioner. And there are many websites that will help you with this if you need. And I can just name a few of them that can help you, because everybody, there are tools out there for all of us to use to actually figure these things out ourselves. But also you can contact somebody who has a background in air conditioning and also refrigeration to give you advice. But here are some of the websites: www.calculator.net, www.omnicalculator.com, or www.learnmetrics.com. Just for some of the tips that we hope will be helpful to you as we get hotter, and what you can do to actually make sure that you have the right air conditioner and in the right space, so that you can maximize your comfort over the summer period.
Some residents may be questioning, is AC better than ceiling fans? And what about running your air conditioner with the windows open?
Let me just say this. If you have them, you should use them. It makes no sense installing ceiling fans and not use them. And certainly many traditional Bermuda home has ceiling fans, because air movement alone can help bring about comfort. And if you're using your AC, putting the fan on may actually keep the temperature constant and keep So you can keep the windows closed, and it can help stabilize and actually help your air conditioner to not actually be inefficient. Actually, the movement of air around the use of the air conditioner helps the air conditioner to be more efficient. So use your ceiling fan, definitely, if you have it.
And obviously it's hot outside, but some people still like to have perhaps a warm shower or a warm bath. So any suggestions about water heater use during the summer?
Yes, turn your water heater down is a good idea during the summer. It's because you don't need as hot water during the summer as you might do during the winter. Cooler showers can obviously be more refreshing, so I would recommend that you turn down your heater, and so that it will obviously, if your heater is not at the higher temperature, you're not going to have as higher power bill. So you probably don't need it to be that high. So it's good to turn down the temperature of your water heater. Even if it's just a few degrees, it can actually make a considerable difference in your bills. So definitely look if you can turn down your water heater. If you don't need to take those hot showers and you can manage with the showers being slightly more cool in the summer, do so. You will see the difference in your bill, because your heaters actually can make up a substantial part of your electric bill.
Many people might not be aware that the Bermuda Aquarium Museum and Zoo has actually reopened at this time. What would you say for people who might be considering visiting that facility during the summer?
Definitely go. I believe that the aquarium zoo is actually going to be open up in the next week or so. So I look forward to seeing people going back to the aquarium and zoo. The personnel there have been, even through the pandemic, caring for the animals there, making sure that any of the potential risks that they could experience are minimized. So there's been a lot of care and attention given to the animals during that period of time. So I do hope that people return to the aquarium and zoo soon when it's fully open, which I believe is in the next week or so. So I welcome seeing people going back to the aquarium.
Also, there are some questions around, I think we touched on earlier, to do with landlord-tenant issues. We'll go back there.
Oh, sure.
So with the pandemic, there's been a question around rent and how much people can be charged for rent. That seems to have come up again. So can you speak perhaps to rent control and how that works if you are a renter, or if that applies to you if you are a renter?
Yes, if a property is under rent control, then that does control the amount of rent that the landlord can charge on that property. I would recommend that people consult with the Office of Consumer Affairs, because they can help them have a better understanding of, one, if where they're living is under rent control, and two, what their rent should be. And so they should consult with the Office of Consumer Affairs to get that detailed information, because they're the ones who can help them understand that better and understand how the process of rent control works.
And a final question in planning. There were some articles in the news that residents will have seen recently regarding things that have been constructed without planning approval. So what would you say to people who are considering doing something? Should they reach out to find out what is necessary, whether planning approval is necessary or not, or is that a consideration that they should have?
Yes, I would definitely recommend that anyone who wants to do anything to their property or they're thinking about it or planning perhaps over the next upcoming months to consider a renovation or some changes to their property that they feel will genuinely perhaps improve their quality of life, or pursuing some sort of investment opportunity around a property, call the planning department. There is one particular issue that I have been very committed to doing, is to making sure that the planning department is a customer service-based agency, that people do not go to planning to hear no. And I know that that may have been the experience of many in the past, but I have impressed upon the leadership of the planning department and the team at my ministry that we must turn planning, if that has been the experience of many, into a customer service-based organization. People can go to planning to realize what is possible, not be told what is not possible. And I've been very committed to that. We have been on, for the last few years, on a very concerted effort of streamlining the planning process and reforming the planning process. Now, a considerable amount of the types of development which took a long time to put through, now the timelines for those approvals have been greatly reduced so that people can have a much better experience with the planning process. And I would encourage individuals and to actually call the planning department themselves. Their personnel are willing and willing to give advice and give direction and to show you how you can perhaps achieve what you're looking to achieve. One of the things that the planning department did over the last year, we had clinics where I tasked them with, let's go into the community and go to the people. And so they can go, so they can have the questions asked. So we did clinics around the island, from east to west, west to east, so that persons could come and sit with planning officials and technical officers and ask questions well in advance of making an application about some of the things that they could do. So I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud of the team at planning for working to make this transition. So I encourage any resident who is interested in doing something with their property in some way to go and talk to the planning people first and foremost, to have them give you some idea of what's possible with whatever your property is.
And Minister, we're in the final couple of minutes of our discussion. Are there any words that you'd like to leave the residents of Bermuda with before we close?
Yes, I would like to thank the residents of Bermuda for giving me the opportunity to be a part of the Progressive Labour Party government, to serve the people of Bermuda in the way that I have been able to serve, certainly over the past 3 years, since 2017. I am committed to trying to make a difference in our island, to improve the conditions of everyone in the island, to make the experience of living in Bermuda better for all of us. This is a small island, but I love our country, and I do believe that myself and all of the people that I work with in the Bermuda government, from the Premier to my cabinet colleagues to the people in my ministry and all who we work with, can achieve a lot of what Bermuda desires. I'm proud of the work that we've done through the pandemic to keep the island safe, and we will continue to do that because we know that it's important that we ensure that Bermuda is a safe, peaceful, and quality place for all of us to enjoy and to live. So I am just honored to have had the opportunity to be a part of that process, and I will continue to work to do that. And anyone who desires to ask any questions of me, whether it has to do with anything that I said on this Facebook Live or anything that they have a question about the government, I am happy to receive those questions. My email address is whroban@gov.bm, and my phone number, my government line, is 532-0021. I am available to answer any questions. If I can help anybody find out something about how they can get better service from the government or get some sort of service or opportunity or assistance from the government, I am a servant and I'm committed to that. So thank you for the opportunity to be with you on this Facebook Live and to continue to serve you and this community.